Alaska depends on Canada for 100% of its overland access to the continental United States, with over 47,000 commercial vehicles crossing through Canadian territory to reach Alaska each year. Right now, that crucial lifeline is being severely restricted in what experts are calling the most aggressive action Canada has ever taken against its southern neighbour. The Canadian government has implemented new measures effectively controlling all land access to Alaska, leaving the state's economy hanging in the balance and its 730,000 residents facing unprecedented isolation. The Trump administration appears completely unprepared for this development, with officials scrambling to formulate a response that won't further escalate tensions with America's largest trading partner. When global powers clash, Canada stands at the crossroads. Canada Connect is your strategic map, decoding the international tensions that rewrite our world. We couldn't do this without our incredible community. Your support means everything. Here's what we've discovered. In a stunning geopolitical chess move, Canada has just implemented border restrictions that have effectively cut off America's most isolated state. The Canadian government has established unprecedented security protocols along key access points to Alaska, creating what many are calling a northern blockade of an American territory. These measures include intensive vehicle inspections, new documentation requirements, and dramatically reduced hours of operation at critical border crossings. What makes this situation particularly alarming is the comprehensive nature of Canada's approach. Unlike targeted trade disputes of the past, these restrictions apply to virtually everything crossing from the mainland United States to Alaska, affecting food deliveries, medical supplies, construction materials, and even tourists attempting to drive the famous Alaska Highway. The Beaver Creek crossing, which handles nearly 65% of commercial traffic to Alaska, now operates under severely restricted hours, just 6 hours daily compared to its previous 18-hour schedule. Commercial drivers report being stranded for days at makeshift camps that have sprung up near the border, waiting for their turn to undergo extensive inspections that can take up to 3 hours per vehicle. "We've never seen anything like this," says Mike Donovan, a 30-year veteran trucker who makes the Seattle to Anchorage run monthly. "I've got refrigerated goods in my trailer that won't survive these delays. The Canadians know exactly what they're doing." The Canadian Parliament has remained remarkably unified on this issue, with even opposition parties supporting what they've termed protective boundary measures. Internal memos obtained through Freedom of Information requests reveal this strategy was developed over an 8-month period in absolute secrecy, with only a small circle of officials aware of the plan's full scope. Perhaps most concerning for American officials is the carefully crafted legal framework Canada has built around these restrictions. Unlike impulsive policy decisions, these measures were designed to withstand international legal challenges, with documentation citing specific provisions in trade agreements that allow for enhanced security protocols under certain conditions. The Canadian Border Services Agency has implemented a new Alaska Transit Documentation Protocol requiring all travelers and commercial vehicles to complete a 27-page application at least 72 hours before attempted crossing. Even minor errors or omissions result in automatic rejection, forcing applicants to restart the process from the beginning. Canadian Foreign Affairs Minister Catherine McKenna defended the measures in a press conference yesterday, stating, Catherine McKenna, "Canada has always respected our treaty obligations with the United States, but we will no longer accept unilateral American actions that threaten our economic sovereignty. These measures simply bring parity to our relationship." But many international analysts see through the diplomatic language. Dr. Elizabeth Harrington, Senior Fellow at the Canadian American Studies Institute, describes this as Elizabeth Harrington, the most significant escalation of tensions between these nations since the War of 1812. Canada is leveraging its geographical advantage in a way that's unprecedented in modern North American relations. The timing couldn't be more precarious for Alaska. With winter fast approaching and temperatures already dropping below freezing at night, the state relies heavily on regular deliveries of heating fuel, non-perishable foods, and cold weather equipment during these critical autumn months. Supply chains were already under pressure from pandemic-related disruptions and increased shipping costs. So what pushed Canada to take such dramatic action now? The catalyst appears to be the combination of three American policies that directly threatened Canadian economic interests. First, the 22% tariff imposed on Canadian softwood lumber earlier this year devastated communities across British Columbia and Ontario. Second, new American restrictions on Canadian dairy products violated provisions of the USMCA trade agreement. But the final straw came when the US challenged Canada's sovereignty claims in the Northwest Passage, a shipping route through the Arctic that is becoming increasingly valuable as climate change reduces ice coverage. These weren't just economic disagreements, explains Canadian Parliament member Jason Kenney. They represented existential threats to industries that form the backbone of our national identity and financial security. Quick pause. Did you know more than 80% of people who watch our videos aren't subscribed? If you're into geopolitical insights with a Canadian lens, hit that subscribe button. It costs nothing, takes a second, and helps us bring you more stories that matter but don't always make headlines. Thank you. And don't go anywhere. Trump's response to Canada's power move is coming up next. And it's not just dramatic, it's personal. What Kenney calls existential threats have forced Canadian officials to confront the US administration with unprecedented assertiveness, catching Washington completely off guard. For perhaps the first time in his presidency, Trump finds himself without leverage against a neighboring nation that holds all the geographic cards. White House insiders reveal a president initially dismissive of the Canadian actions. The president waved it off during his morning briefing, says a senior administration official speaking on condition of anonymity. He literally said, "Canada, please, one phone call and this nonsense ends." That cavalier attitude reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of just how determined Canadian leadership had become. That confidence evaporated during what one State Department official described as the most contentious call with a Canadian leader in modern diplomatic history. Sources familiar with the conversation report Trump was repeatedly interrupted and ultimately cut off mid-sentence by the Canadian Prime Minister, who firmly rejected suggestions that the border measures were simply negotiating tactics. The president was stunned, says former diplomatic liaison Margaret Abernathy. He's accustomed to being the one who hangs up on other leaders, not the other way around. The call ended with the Canadian PM delivering what White House staffers described as an ice-cold ultimatum. Either the US addresses Canadian sovereignty concerns or the border restrictions would tighten further. Secretary of State Antony Blinken immediately dispatched a delegation to Ottawa, expecting the traditional diplomatic reception that has characterized US-Canada relations for decades. Instead, they were met with what one delegate called Swiss-like neutrality and Finnish determination. The delegation returned to Washington within 48 hours, having secured no concessions. In the Situation Room, military and security advisors presented Trump with a range of increasingly desperate options. There was serious discussion about military escorts for commercial convoys, confirms retired General James Mattock, who maintains contact with Pentagon officials. Other options included invoking emergency powers to establish an air bridge or even temporary seizure of key transport corridors. Trump's public rhetoric underwent a dramatic transformation as the severity of Alaska's isolation became apparent. His initial tweet dismissing the situation as fake news about our great friends up north gave way to increasingly urgent public statements. By day 4, he was condemning Canadian aggression and accusing Ottawa of holding Alaska hostage during a hastily arranged press briefing. Behind closed doors, the administration has fractured into competing camps. We've got the Hawks pushing for an immediate show of force, explains former White House Communications Director Anthony Richards. Then there's the trade team warning that escalation could collapse supply chains across 13 states beyond just Alaska. The disagreements have become heated enough that 2 senior advisors nearly came to blows during last Thursday's strategy session. The world now watches as Trump faces perhaps his most unexpected diplomatic challenge. How does a president who built his brand on aggressive negotiation respond when traditional leverage points simply don't exist? The answer has surprised even his closest allies. Trump's response has been characterized by visible frustration, yet uncharacteristic restraint. During a private fundraiser in Michigan, he reportedly confided to donors that he feels personally betrayed by Canadian leadership he previously considered steadfast allies. This isn't just about policy, he told attendees. This is personal now. The administration finds itself in an unfamiliar defensive position. One senior Pentagon official describes an atmosphere of controlled panic as agencies race to develop contingency plans. We've been gaming out scenarios for conflicts with adversaries for years, the official notes, but nobody thought to plan for Canada effectively closing access to American territory. As Washington drowns in controlled panic, Alaska faces a stark reality that few Americans can comprehend. Imagine waking up to discover that your grocery stores have bare shelves, gas stations are rationing fuel, and the roads connecting you to essential supplies now sit behind an international barrier. This nightmare scenario isn't hypothetical. It's unfolding right now across America's largest state, where 730,000 citizens find themselves isolated in what experts are calling an unprecedented civilian crisis. The vulnerability of Alaska has always existed in plain sight. Its positioning as an exclave physically separated from the continental United States means nearly 3/4 of its consumer goods must travel through Canadian territory. This geographic reality has transformed overnight from an administrative footnote into a strategic choke point that threatens the very livability of the state. In Anchorage, Alaska's largest city, residents report increasingly desperate conditions. "I've never seen anything like this," says Meredith Tompkins, who manages a regional grocery chain. "Fresh produce disappeared first, then dairy, and now we're seeing shelves empty of canned goods and basic household items. People are scared. The impact extends beyond food heating. Fuel reserves are dwindling just as temperatures begin their seasonal plunge toward the brutal Alaskan winter." Governor Michael Dunleavy's emergency declaration last Tuesday activated 300 National Guard personnel specifically tasked with coordinating alternative supply methods and preventing civil unrest. "This is not just a supply chain disruption, it's a humanitarian challenge," Dunleavy stated during a press conference in Juneau. "We're working around the clock to ensure vulnerable communities don't face life-threatening shortages." The military has begun emergency airlifts for critical medical supplies and insulin, but the economics make this approach financially impossible for regular consumer goods. It costs roughly 9 times more to airlift basic supplies compared to ground transportation, explains Dr. Patricia Young, an economics professor at the University of Alaska. We're looking at milk potentially costing $22 a gallon if this continues. For the state's $4.5 billion tourism industry, the timing couldn't be worse. We've had over 85% of our winter bookings cancelled, reports Eric Summers, who operates a dog sledding experience near Fairbanks. Even if the border situation resolves tomorrow, the damage to our reputation will last years. Resource extraction industries, which account for nearly 30% of Alaska's economy, report being unable to move equipment and personnel, forcing project delays that could cost hundreds of millions. The human impact extends beyond economics. In communities like Eagle, which sits just 2 miles from the Canadian border, residents describe heartbreaking separations. My sister lives 20 minutes away in Yukon Territory, says Richard Mahoney, a member of the Han-Hwekin First Nation. For generations, our people moved freely across what's now the border. Today, I can't visit my own family. With supplies diminishing and winter's approach, federal and state officials are scrambling for solutions. The most promising proposal involves establishing a maritime corridor agreement through the Inside Passage. This would formalize American shipping rights while acknowledging Canadian sovereignty concerns over contested waters. This crisis could ultimately produce a more stable framework for cross-border relations, suggests former State Department negotiator Hannah Richardson, but that's cold comfort for Alaskans facing empty shelves today. Perhaps most remarkable is how Alaskans themselves are responding. Community-based solutions are emerging across the state as residents tap into their legendary self-reliance. In Sitka, residents have established a digital food-sharing network that connects those with surplus supplies to families in need. Meanwhile, in rural communities, elders are teaching younger generations traditional subsistence practices that sustained their ancestors before modern supply chains existed. Alaskans have always been resilient, notes Timothy Davidson, who runs a community workshop in Wasilla, teaching preservation techniques. We're reviving skills many thought were lost, smoking salmon, preserving game meat, and foraging local plants. It's not enough to replace what we've lost, but it's helping bridge the gap. As the frozen standoff between Canada and the United States continues, the world watches a new chapter unfold in North American relations. What began as a dispute over lumber and Arctic passages has exposed the precarious nature of Alaska's geographical reality, an American state utterly dependent on Canadian goodwill. The historical irony isn't lost on international observers. The world's longest undefended border has suddenly revealed itself to be a vulnerability few American strategists ever seriously considered. As diplomatic channels remain frostbitten, both nations face a fundamental choice that will reshape their relationship for generations. Will this crisis become the foundation for a more balanced partnership, or the first tremor in a seismic shift between these longtime allies? When global power dynamics shift, it's not always about missiles or tanks. It's about supply routes, border crossings, and which nation controls the levers of access. Canada has made its move. Trump's caught off guard, and Alaska is paying the price. We'll continue tracking this unprecedented standoff as it unfolds, because what happens next could reshape North American relations for a generation. Thanks for watching. If this helped make sense of a complicated moment, like, share, and subscribe. You're part of a community that values clarity in chaos. Until next time, stay sharp, stay